Hey everyone, PJ here with another video for Exotic Car Hacks, and today we're actually not going to be talking about cars, but instead we're going to be talking about censorship and what the world has come to. You see, as of recently, I have just purchased this latest addition to my collection, the Bugatti Chiron, and as I bought this car, everyone kept not only congratulating me, but also tagging Andrew Tate or saying you're a top G, or some of the things that he has basically marketed himself and this particular car to be about his brand. One of the things that I find really interesting is that recently you may have heard that Andrew Tate has been banned from all social media platforms, meaning that while people can still share news of him or things just like I'm doing here today, he is no longer allowed to post on such platforms. Not on Instagram, not on Facebook. He pissed off someone really badly and basically got himself banned. So it brings me today to this conversation today about censorship and if Andrew Tate should have been left on the internet, or was it a good thing that they removed him? And it brings me back to this ideology that it seems that nobody likes to basically have a conversation with someone with a conflicting opinion. Everything you do with the press, everything you watch on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, or anything is not there to give you information or even teach you anything about what's happening in the world. Instead, is there to put a personality in front of you that enables you to kind of agree with what they're saying, because you kind of watch them because you agree, because they or rarely have conflicting information. They choose to selectively share what they like or don't like about certain things, and as a result get their audiences who already agree with them to get even more pumped about agreeing with them. So you're really ultimately building more of a celebrity status that you're really catering or curating the news. And you know, the same can be said about automotive brands. I mean, how many times have we heard Ferrari banning people who have spoken negatively about their brand? How many times have we heard them saying you're no longer allowed to buy a car because you put a wrap on it and you express yourself in a way, and even though you paid $1 million for this, you're not allowed to do this, this, and that, or we won't sell you a car. And so, you know, one of the things that people don't realize is that there's two ways to basically buy a Ferrari. You can buy it brand new from Ferrari and get a great deal, and often it's worth more on the secondary market, or you can buy it used on the secondary market and as a result are kind of in your own queue of whatever you want to do. Because if I decide to put a ton of crap on this car and I bought it used, basically Ferrari can't ban me from buying future used cars because they're not the ones selling me the cars. Nonetheless, Ferrari does its best to kind of uphold its brand the way it wants to be perceived rather than for the reality of what it really is. I have called Ferraris giant pieces of shit for the last like 10 years, and I have said that in certain times where credit is due, like in the SF90, which was one of my favorite Ferraris ever made, I've discussed how I truly enjoy the craftsmanship and they've done a good job. But I've tore them for the F8, I tore them for the F8 Spider, I tore them for the 812 GTS, and basically haven't turned into a craftsmanship quality control nightmare and have done such a terrible job at going through the dealers. And I genuinely don't give a shit if I get banned from buying a car not from Ferrari, and I never really cared to buy more cars from them. And I've also spoken very positively and negatively about other brands like Lamborghini, Bugatti, and everything else because I'm a curator of what I believe to be an opinion. And an opinion is important because I come from a place of spending my own $3 million on a car and really understanding that just because I paid $3 million gives me the right to have an opinion about it. And this brings us back to Andrew Tate. You see, Andrew Tate always used to say, what color is your Bugatti? This is what kind of made his brand somewhat famous, saying that you really don't get to have an opinion if you haven't earned your right to speak. And this was his way to kind of say that he has a lot of money and has earned his right to speak. So I wanted to take a second and basically talk about this ideology about what I think about if Andrew Tate should or shouldn't have been banned off the internet. So I, just as a disclaimer, I don't really agree with everything Andrew Tate says. If you actually listen to a lot of his longer speeches, not like these little snippets on the internet, most people have a very small attention span and don't really investigate things, they just hear things. So if you investigate the entire ecosystem of what Andrew Tate is saying, there's probably about 80% truth and 20% fluff from my perspective. So 80% of it is an ideology, a way to think, and it isn't necessarily a good or bad thing, just a way to think that perhaps has been washed away over the last 10 years by a lot of noise in the idea of how people should be living. You know, he talks a lot about masculinity disappearing off the world. He talks a lot about men coming back and becoming men, and they're not. And there's a lot of truth from my perspective on what he's saying having been a big reason for the decline in a lot of societal values over the years. So there is some agreement to that. And then some of the rest of the stuff he says is pretty outrageous. Now, like he'll talk about how he was doing this hooker or this and that, and this happened, and calls a lot of women hookers and calls them all hookers because they all take money, etc. And so there is this discomfort with that 20 percentile, which really drives the 80% message. So there's a difference that people don't really understand about how information is shared in today's space. And I want to try to make you understand why getting Andrew Tate off of social media was a really, really bad idea. First off, I think, and you're probably going to disagree with this a lot, which is okay, I think Trump should have been taken off social media, and I agreed with that decision for one core reason, because his representation isn't the representation of himself as a brand, it's a representation of himself, which is us as a country and our values and what we share with the world. And the level of disrespect towards certain individuals within our own communities, that's a measure for not allowing that voice to spread further than it has to. However, when you're an individual and you share your brand, you're not forced to listen to that person. If you don't like Andrew Tate, you don't have to click his videos. If you don't like certain other people, like maybe you don't like Patrick Bet-David, maybe you don't like what I have to say about cars, you don't have to watch my videos. You are watching these things by choice. This is no different than drinking maybe a Red Bull and saying Red Bull is bad for you and it gives you cancer, and maybe that's how you feel about it, but you're not forced to drink a Red Bull, right? However, you should be given rights to clean water if you live in America, because water your body needs. Red Bull you don't have to have. It's actually quite expensive, and it'll probably kill you in a couple of years. So, but there's no proof of that, and it just doesn't matter because you're not forced to do it. And so this is the same ideology between what we're talking about here. It's forced information coming from the highest office of the land, right? You're forced to get exposed to this information, so it has to come true in a manner that gets the job done. And on the other side, there's entertainment and your choice of mentorship or who you want to follow and what you want to learn from them, which doesn't mean everyone should agree with what that person's saying. But what I was saying about marketing that people have to understand is that people today, there's so much noise all over the internet, there's so much happening that you have to find key ways to get people to share your message. And I guess where people misunderstood the Andrew Tate situation is I think they took that 20% of crazy talk and didn't look at it as marketing, but instead look at it as the core message, rather than understanding that his entire core message was actually very different than these snippets that were getting shared. Now, in his interview with Patrick Bet-David, which I thought was an excellent interview because it wasn't one that was forced on you with like from one perspective or another, but rather one you just listened to, and he didn't intervene that much in the interview, so good job, Patrick, on doing that interview. But I think one thing that was very, very clear in that interview is that the marketing ideology of what Andrew Tate was misunderstood for the message. And I think a big piece of that comes down to just how he marketed himself. And there are things he did because people do share a lot of what is extraordinarily different from what they agree with rather than what they agree with. We tend not to share people who just say, okay, this is the same thing, but rather people who make a very concise point to make that point to the opposition. I'll give you an example. If you want to share something that you agree with on social media, you share a very well thought out report or something outrageous someone did that validates your point because you want others who aren't believers of your point to come to your camp. And the same happens with the other side. Basically, if you disagree with something, you post about it to get your audience to agree with you that the guy is crazy. So we have turned, and social media, and we can thank Mark Zuckerberg for this, but social media has turned us from an individual who has the opportunity to debate to individuals who kind of camp out others that just agree with them. And so while I didn't agree with all things that Andrew Tate said, I did and listen, pay attention, and watch and investigate a lot of what he shared. And I think there's a lot of positive value in the stuff he was sharing, and there's a lot of reality in the overall message he was sharing. However, the way he was sharing the message was a necessity in marketing to get attention, using keywords that triggered people like hookers, or keywords like all women are hookers, or even talking about things like, what color is your Bugatti? Like, shut up, you don't have a voice. These things are very real. I mean, in the world that we live in society, money is the differentiator. The more money you have, the more of an opinion you have. But if you shut someone off because you're poor, you don't have an opinion, I've said that 100 times, it triggers them because it makes them reflect on the fact that they're not good enough to be able to have an opinion, which is true, but no one likes to hear that. So ultimately, you position yourself in a situation where you create a lot of enemies who are truly worthless and harmless in the sense that they're just fucking morons. But at the end of the day, you still have an opportunity to still get a lot of these collective enemies and eventually piss off somebody who is part of that camp that has the power to do something about it. So unfortunately, we don't get to hear so much of Andrew Tate all over the internet, which is sad, honestly, because I thought his message was 80% positive, 20% controversial, but I felt even the controversial aspect wasn't necessarily his core belief looking at his other interviews, but rather his opportunity to get your attention through marketing. And that's something that, again, people are going to have a problem with. Now, there comes the other agreement or the other ideology that's, well, let's find something else he did wrong, or maybe he did this scam here, or he laundered money here, etc. Then it comes the idea of character, right? Was he the right character? And was he the right person to follow? And here's where the difference occurs. His character is not one you have to agree with to hear out his message. And his character is one you can choose to follow or not if you want to further spread his message or hurt his message by not spreading it. That is in your hands. That is the power of social media. To censor the person is where the danger occurs, right? To censor the person is to then say there is an ultimate person above that person that gets to choose what messaging or direction of messaging should occur in the world we live ahead. Now, listen, I was the biggest anti-Trump supporter in my life, and I will continue to, and I'm not a Biden supporter either, I'm not a political supporter, but I believe in good common sense laws. And I think the ideology of choosing who to censor or not when it is entertainment is a very dangerous thing, especially when we talk about, you know, Chappelle trying to be canceled, and this ideology of censorship and cancel culture is very, very dangerous, because once you start, you kind of can't stop, and before you know it, you've made everybody look the same back into the herd. So again, if you want to learn more about my views and my opportunity in terms of perspective about how I look at the world, make sure to read my books. Many of you may not know, but I've written 3 best-selling books that are very, very popular. Third Circle Theory, Radius, and Gate of Choice, which is ultimately the roadmap to human consciousness. Believe it or not, that is where my true work is, even more so than cars, watches, or anything else you know me for on the internet. But that is the entertainment side of my life and what I love doing, cars and watches. So I share that passion with you as much as I share my teachings with you as it pertains to, you know, consciousness, self-awareness, and awareness as it comes. So again, if you want to learn more about any of these things, click the links in the description, and of course take the Exotic Car Hacks training to learn more about cars, and like, turn on subscription and notifications, whatever you do, and I'll catch you on the next video. But again, you know, it really comes down to this particular question, right? What color is your Bugatti?